Hi, welcome to White Threads FlossTube number 31. If you were here for the previous episode of White Threads FlossTube, you will have seen my announcement of the title and subject of my next book, which is Frisian White Work. I've been amazed by the response to the video and to the announcement, and it's been wonderful to have everyone's encouraging comments that they're so enthusiastic about it and so looking forward to it. So I'm keeping on working on it, and it will be done as soon as I can get it done. Today, what I'm going to talk to you about is an Elizabethan project that I made quite some years ago. About 10 years ago, no, it was the end of 2008, I believe, so a little bit longer than 10 years ago. In 2008, I had chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, chronic fatigue syndrome, for people who know anything about it, can go on for years and years, and I only had it for 9 months, which, for those of you who know nothing about it, 9 months sounds like a terribly long time to be very, very ill. And it was a long time, but compared to other people, it was a really, really, really short time. So I'm incredibly grateful that it was so short. I knew that I was getting better when I was able to start stitching again. It doesn't mean I was better yet, but I was getting better. And I, at the time, decided it would be a good time to work on a left-handed stitch dictionary because it didn't involve a whole heap of large projects that I needed to stitch. It was all bite-sized information. I could just do a stitch, the instructions for it and the stitching for it as I felt able. So it was a bite-sized project. Well, it was a project in bite sizes, and that meant it was suitable for me to work on while I was getting better from chronic fatigue syndrome. I've just read back through my notes, and it appears that Mary Corbett of Needle and Thread blog gave me a challenge to include plaited braid stitch in my stitch dictionary. And it appears that I took her up on that challenge. So I decided that if I was going to, I needed to really understand stitch, and to do that I needed to have stitched a lot of it. So this is what I stitched. This is a design that I came up with based on historical Elizabethan works. And these this trellis stitch here and a detached buttonhole here, and then all of this gold work around here is plaited braid stitch. Now this is a stitch that many people just ooh and ah over, as did I, and so I wanted to make sure that I could do it well. In stitching this project, I learned so much about plaited braid stitch. In learning how to do the stitch, I looked at many different instructions, as many as I could find, and some of them worked it from this end and some of them worked it from the other end. So some went back this way, some went this way, and I had to decide which suited me best. And then once I'd done that, I was able to write out all of the instructions step by step with diagrams of each step, and it helped me to learn about the spacing of the stitch. It helped me to learn about how to do mitered bits so that you could do joins like here and here and here. And it was a really, really, really valuable thing to do, to stitch that much of it and learn so much. I was going to make this into a little bag. It's never happened. I just like having it like this. I can pull it out of a drawer and admire it and put it back in the drawer, and it's still there. And because it's not being handled a lot, it's stayed in reasonably good condition. So if you're interested in learning the stitch as well, the instructions went into my left-handed stitch dictionary, the Left-Handed Embroiderer's Companion, and you can see that there's 2 full pages on how to do the stitch, and including tips on making it look the best you can. So things about thread thickness and downward spacing and width spacing and all that sort of thing. The same instructions were reinterpreted for my right-handed stitch dictionary, the Right-Handed Embroiderer's Companion, and so right-handers can do it too. So I took Mary up on her suggestion, and I did include them in the book. Now, one of the things that was really important to me when I was doing it was, well, let me go back a bit further. My husband used to work he's a librarian, and he used to work in a medical library at a hospital. And at the time, I don't know if it's still the same, they were really big into a thing called evidence-based medicine. And the idea was that doctors and practitioners, medical practitioners would make decisions on patient care based on evidence. So they would look at what had happened before and they would make decisions based on that. Well, in my embroidery practice, I do evidence-based stitching. So for me, that means looking at the historical record and making decisions based on what I see in the historical record and wanting to emulate that. So for me, that means that when I'm doing hardanger, my needle woven bars are narrow because historically that's the way they worked them. I know that a lot of people think that they should be worked as wide as a cluster box, and that's a little bugbear for me because historically they weren't worked like that. They were worked very narrow. And so I wanted to make my plaited braid stitch look as historically accurate as possible as well. So that meant that I looked for images of historical pieces. I put together a Pinterest page of as many Elizabethan pieces that I could find with plaited braid stitch on it so that I could look at them all in great detail and understand how it was stitched and what it looked like when they did it. Around that time, there was a reproduction of an Elizabethan jacket being made, and I still feel that the thread that they used was too narrow for the width of stitch they used, and so it didn't give them enough coverage. And to make the stitch work for them, they had to squash it down so that if this is the width and this is the spacing of the stitches, they squashed them to make the coverage work okay. I felt that it didn't look historically right, and I'm sorry, that's probably really scandalous thing to say. It's a beautiful, beautiful jacket that they made, but I don't believe that their plaited braid stitch looked as historically accurate as it could. And so the way I solved that on mine was to use a slightly thicker thread compared to the width than what they had used. So I don't know what width they used, but I feel their thread was too thin for the width that they used. So I used a thicker one, and it was a Benton and Johnson T71. I looked up my notes because otherwise I would not have remembered that. And that was the thread that I used for the width that I used. And because it was a thicker thread, it meant that I didn't have to squash my stitches that way and that they could have enough space between each one. So I'll show it to you a little bit close up. I don't know if you can actually see this. There we are. And you can see the beautiful shine that the gold work has. I'll move it up so you can see further down as well. Right. So you can see all of the stitching on that. This was a project that was unlike anything that I'd ever done before, and I absolutely loved doing it. It was a real joy. The colours were just such, well, to me they're joyful colours, and as it was a project that I did as I was coming out of a very serious illness, it really was one of the best things that I could have done. It showed to me that I was getting better, which was great, but it also just was such a joyful piece to do and was really an encouraging thing to do. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing that today. If you're wanting to learn how to do plaited braid stitch for yourself, you can find the stitch instructions in my stitch dictionaries, the left-handed embroiderer's companion and the right-handed embroiderer's companion. And I hope that you are able to have some success with it too. If you already have done some projects that have got this stitch on it, I'd love to see them. Please share them with me. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.